Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Tuesday, April 19th, 2022 Washington County Board of Commissioners meeting. Clerk Moss, announcements and roll call, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Washington County Board of Commissioners, also meeting as the Board of Directors for Clean Water Services and all other county service districts, is now meeting this regular session, April 19th, 2022. Commissioner Rogers.
Here.
Commissioner Treese.
Here.
Commissioner Fye.
Here.
Vice Chair Willie.
Here.
Chair Harrington.
Here. All right, welcome everyone. I'd like to note that there are no changes to today's agenda from the originally posted agenda. Next, we'll move on to public communications. Clerk Moss, do we have anyone who is signed up to speak with us this morning?
We have no one signed up, Madam Chair. Would any members of our attendees wish to provide testimony on any item of county business for up to 2 minutes? I'll give you just a moment to raise your hands. Not seeing any hands, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Next, we'll move on to today's consent agenda, which consists of 14 items. We have one set of minutes, one item from Clean Water Services, one from Assessment and Taxation, one from the Cooperative Library Services, one from the County Administrative Office, one from the Sheriff's Office, 4 related to support services, and 4 for land use and transportation. What are the wishes of the Commission regarding today's consent agenda? We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Commissioner Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank you, Commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously, 5-0. Next, we'll move on to proclamations. The first proclamation for today is related to proclaiming National Infertility Awareness Week in Washington County, April 24th through the 30th of this year, 2022, I believe. Perhaps a Scribner's error. Ms. Angie and Clerk Moss, do we have anyone to present today's proclamation to us?
Madam Chair, yes, Commissioner Fye will be presenting this item for you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Harrington. Thank you, Kevin. Yes, we'll correct that. The date, it should say 2022 before we publish that. Tanya, and I think Brenda listening. But this proclamation was brought to my awareness and to my knowledge from a constituent in Washington County that really wanted to raise awareness because our residents and community members that suffer infertility usually suffer in silence, and just wanted to raise awareness on this. So I'll be reading this proclamation, and then we'll make the correction. It should say National Infertility Awareness Week in Washington County, April 24th to 30th, 2022. So we'll make that minor corrections. Whereas, according to the CDC, 1 in 8 couples have trouble getting pregnant or sustaining a pregnancy. And whereas the World Health Organization and American Medical Association define infertility as a disease, and whereas infertility affects women and men equally and does not discriminate based on race, religion, sexual orientation, marital status, or social economic level. And whereas the LGBTQ community also faces challenges when building their families, and whereas all people challenged in their family building journey should have access to all family building options, and whereas family building options, including adoption and medical treatment, such as in vitro fertilization and third-party reproduction, and whereas cost and lack of insurance coverage and are barriers for many in our county to access the family building option they need, and whereas Washington County serves in preventative role by assuring access to screening services and treatment of sexually transmitted infections through local providers like neighborhood health center and Virginia Garcia Memorial Health Center. And whereas raising awareness of infertility and the barriers faced by the family building community is the first step to removing these barriers. And whereas Washington County joins Resolve, the National Infertility Association, dedicated volunteers, healthcare professionals, and members of the infertility and family building community by participating in this promotion. Now, therefore, we, the Washington County Board of Commissioners, do hereby proclaim April 24th to 30th, 2022 National Infertility Awareness Week.
It may just be me, but I thought I heard more than what I read in the packet. So if we could just make sure that the proclamation that we're voting on and that available to the public matches what I thought I heard today, that would be great. That's my only.
Chair Harrington, staff will ensure that occurs.
Okay. And at this time, I'd like to make sure we invite any comments from commissioners regarding this proclamation. Commissioner Treese, go ahead.
I just want to say thank you for bringing this forward, and Commissioner Fye, thank you for reading this. I concur that this is an issue that most people suffer in silence and in privacy about, and just knowing that there is a community that supports the processes required to build your family that's a very good thing. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Seeing no other comments, do we have a motion to adopt this proclamation as read? We have a motion from Commissioner Fye, a second from Commissioner Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank you, commissioners. Anyone opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Next, we have a proclamation to proclaim this Friday, April 22nd, as Earth Day. Do we have a staff presentation or anything else?
We have Robin Strawn here with us, as well as Rachel Fuller.
Please go ahead, Robin.
All right, thank you. Thank you for letting me talk to you about Earth Day today. Good morning, Chair Harrington and commissioners. My name is Robin Strawn and I am Washington County's Sustainability Manager. Thank you for allowing me time on your agenda to recognize the importance of Earth Day. Washington County supported environmental protection and sustainability efforts long before my position was established. The county values leadership in sustainability as a reflection of effective public administration, the health of our community, and concern for future generations. I would like to acknowledge the hard work that county employees do daily to ensure we minimize environmental impacts, plan for the best possible outcomes, and build a responsible organization. County departments help protect and preserve resources and support sustainable and equitable communities. The work we do is important and vital to the long-term resilience of our organization, whether it's increasing the efficiency of county buildings or vehicles, providing access to safe pedestrian walkways, improving air quality, or empowering sustainable habits. Each department plays a role in operationalizing sustainability and advancing strategies that lead to equitable outcomes. We also engage with community partners committed to this important work in our community and the region, ensuring we're on a similar path. My division is currently in the process of developing the next county climate and sustainability strategic action plan. We're leading the planning process with an equity focus as well as a deeper look at the county's carbon footprint. Over the years, the county has made strides in reducing our operational footprint, which helps save money and resources. We're also committed to doing more in the coming years with the new plan and goals in place. Additionally, this spring, my team is encouraging all employees to learn more about climate change and climate solutions so they can take climate positive actions. We hosted an online educational series, and we're in the middle of a climate-focused challenge currently. Throughout the year, we offer department trainings, self-paced classes, toolkits for action, and we are now reopening our in-person services. Even though Earth Day is every day for my team, we're thrilled that this important work is elevated each year at this time. And therefore, I'm pleased that we can take time today to have your board formally acknowledge Washington County's commitment by recognizing Earth Day. Are there any questions or comments before the proclamation is read?
I just want to reflect that I really appreciate the reminder that truly every day is Earth Day. When I was in 6th grade, I was an impressionable 10-year-old girl when we had the honor of the very first Earth Day here in our community. And the whole experience has stayed with me. I won a poster contest in that. And that phrase has stuck with me as well. And I really appreciate your bringing it forward to my attention again, because back when I was 10 years old, we were learning so much about how we couldn't just put spent liquids into our rivers, because really there is no way when we talk about throwing garbage away or sending liquid waste away, because we have a shared planet. So thank you, Robin, Ms. Angie, Ms. Fuller, for the work of the team, as well as with Clean Water Services, to remind us that we, the human inhabitants of this planet, are stewards of this very precious earth. And I look forward to hearing the proclamation, the words of the proclamation brought to life. Were there any other questions or comments from commissioners with regard to Ms. Strahan's comments before we move to the proclamation? No? Take it away, please.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Proclamation, Board of Commissioners for Washington County, a proclamation in honor of Earth Day, April 19th, 2022. Whereas the first Earth Day of April 22, 1970 is credited with launching the modern environmental movement, and whereas Washington County recognizes that human-caused climate change is seriously impacting the health, integrity, and stability of ecosystems, economies, and communities on the global, national, and local scale, and whereas Washington County affirms the validity and importance of climate science and climate data to make educated and informed decisions in planning, policy development, and program operations, and whereas Washington County establishes metrics for sustainability evaluation and tracks building, energy, fuel, water, waste, travel, and purchasing to assess the county's carbon footprint, and whereas Washington County is a statewide leader in strategic energy management through efficient use of existing energy infrastructure, conservation strategies, investments in renewable energy and electric vehicles, and the implementation of a county energy management policy, and whereas Washington County celebrates the collaboration between internal departments and community partners, which enables the execution of sustainable strategies and actions, whereas environmental protection and natural resource areas of special importance are to Washington County residents, agriculture and industry, driving community well-being and economic prosperity. And whereas Washington County emphasizes the role of sustainable education to create shared understanding of climate change and its effects, inform decision-making, and protect future generations. And whereas Washington County acknowledges the disappropriate burden placed on frontline communities, including Black and Indigenous people, communities of color, older adults, and children, to deal with the effects of climate change. And whereas people, regardless of race, gender, income, sexual orientation, gender identity, ability, and national origin, have the right to a healthy, sustainable environment. And whereas Washington County recommits to its mission of creating equitable, healthy, peaceful, and safe and sustainable communities, now therefore be it resolved that on this 19th day of April 2022, the Washington County Board of Commissioners does hereby proclaim April 22, 2022 as Earth Day and calls on the people of Washington County to observe this month with appropriate programs and activities and use this as an opportunity to re-energize their innovative spirit and explore new paths to sustainability.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Commissioners, any comments? Would anyone like to make a motion? A motion from Commissioner Rogers. Do we have a second from Commissioner Treese? All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0 to proclaim Friday, April 22nd, 2022 as Earth Day. Thank you, team. Next, we'll move on to presentations. We have one presentation today, and it's on the Washington County Green Business Award certification. So I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Mira Samantel of Ms. Angie's staff.
Thank you so much, Chair Harrington, Board of County Commissioners. My name is Mira Samant. I'm the Interim Director for Health and Human Services. Really pleased to be here with you today for the Green Business Leaders Certification presentation. For HHS, we have with us Jennifer Stefanik. She's our Green Business Coordinator with our Solid Waste and Recycling Division. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Robin, who can make the introductions and also get us started with today's presentation.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to make sure that I introduce my staff. Carolina Martins will be presenting on behalf of the Sustainability Division for this award, and Jennifer Stefanik will support her from Solid Waste and Recycling. So I'll go ahead and hand it off to Carolina to kick it off.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. My name is Carolina Martins. I am the Sustainability Specialist and I work with the Sustainability Division. I'm here today with our partners from Solid Waste and Recycling to celebrate achieving the gold level of the Green Business Certification. Next slide, please. Washington County's Sustainability Division has been working for more than a decade to improve internal county operations. This year, our division applied to renew the Green Business Leaders Certification. The application was completed in collaboration with different departments and divisions that have done ongoing efforts to incorporate sustainability best practices to county operations. There are many actions that can contribute to a sustainable workplace, and the county implemented more than 70 best practices that count towards the certification. On the screen, you see these areas: community and employee engagement, equity practices, reduce, reuse, recycle, food waste prevention and donation, energy and water reduction, toxics reduction, and hazardous waste. We acknowledge that this is the result of the great work done by all departments and divisions. And we proudly share that these efforts have helped Washington County achieve the highest level of the certification. We are grateful to see that Board of Commissioners' commitment to sustainability and proactive efforts of our employees are being recognized today. Now, I'll pass to Jennifer Stefanik from Solid Waste and Recycling.
Thank you, Carolina. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. My name is Jennifer Stefanik from Solid Waste and Recycling's Green Business Leaders Program. I'd like to highlight a few key achievements that were new to the Sustainability's renewal of the Green Business Certification that prioritize equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives and real-time climate change reduction practices. Sustainability is supported in its EDI training and guidance efforts and in instituting policies that promote contracting with businesses that are Black, Indigenous, and people of color owned, women owned, and/or service disabled veteran owned. In addition, the county has prioritized having a gender neutral ADA compliant private space other than a restroom available for all staff for their personal needs, including for new moms, for personal phone calls, and changing areas for those who walk, bike, and roll to work. Also notable is the county's annual celebration of the United Nations Day of World Social Justice and the collaboration with Identity and Heritage Diversity celebrations. Other green practices achieved include multiple electric vehicle charging stations offered to both county staff and the general public, and 4 power generating solar installations, including on the new Wingspan event and conference center, that coincide with a robust strategic energy management policy to reduce carbon emissions facility-wide. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So this slide represents a small fraction of the business community that the Green Business Leaders Program has certified and works closely with to provide outreach and assistance. Our inclusive business program supports community organizations, universities and schools, tech firms, small local restaurants and food producers, retail shops, and even 2-person house cleaning micro businesses. Our program really prioritizes working with food generators to compost food waste, but really to also connect businesses with donation agencies to get that edible food to local community members. We also focus on outreach to Latino, Latina, Latinx businesses of all sizes and support small business development programs alongside with our regional partners. And our outreach to businesses is ongoing, and we continually look to support their waste reduction goals. Next slide, please. Washington County not only walks the talk, but leads by example in showing that instituting sustainable initiatives supports the health and well-being of our local communities and the region. Please join me now in a virtual round of applause in the collective achievements of the county with support from the board and everyone that contributed to these accomplishments. Well done, Washington County. And so that's the end of our slides. So I was hoping to have Carolina Martins come on the screen to show the actual plaque. This is a picture of the plaque that we have given to the county, but Carolina actually has the plaque. So there you can see it here in our virtual sharing of this award. So this will run from 2022 through 2025. And so thank you everyone for being a part of this achievement. And thank you for your time today.
Would any commissioners like to share any comments?
I just want to say congratulations. So I think that it's very cool, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
I will add thank you to our team, our executive team, and all of the employees who report to them for being brave, being accountable, and striving each and every day to be good stewards, not only for the benefit of those who call Washington County home, whether it's for work or for residence or just for a visit, but you also contribute to how Washington County is part of a larger world. We're one of 36 counties of 50 states here in the United States. That's one country on one continent, part of a much larger world. Thank you very much. All righty, we'll move on to the next items on our agenda. And they relate to boards and commissions. We have 2 different boards and commission topics. The first is an action to appoint 2 residents to the Washington County and Service District for Lighting Number 1 Combined Budget Committee in the form of Paul Lathrop to fill a term that expires June 30th, 2024, and Joseph Ross to fill a term that expires June 30th of 2024 as well. That's the first one. The second one is to appoint 2 residents of our county to the Enhanced Sheriff Patrol District Urban Road Maintenance District Combined Budget Committee in the form of Ferdinando Lira to fill a term that expires June 30th of 2024, and J. Sean Fields to fill a term that also expires June 30th of 2024. What are the wishes of the commission? We have a thumbs up motion from Commissioner Rogers. We have a thumbs up second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye or raising your hand. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Next, we'll move on to a proposal to appoint Leslie Albert as a member of the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee for a term ending March 31st of 2026. What are the wishes of the commission? We have a motion from Commissioner Willie, a second from Commissioner Rogers. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Next, we'll move on to public hearings. And with these topics, we have some pretty heavy lift here, pretty substantial work to consider. So first, I'd like to ask for a motion to read ordinance number 886 by title only. Do we have such a motion? We have a motion from Commissioner Willie, a second from Commissioner Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Mr. Card, could you please do us the honors?
Of course, Chair Harrington. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the ordinance in the packet. One sec.
Tom, the title is on the first page of the staff report.
Got it. Apologies, the staff report is lengthy. I'm at the back of it. Proposed land use ordinance number 886, an ordinance amending the comprehensive framework plan for the urban areas to implement House Bill 2001 middle housing provisions.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. At this juncture, I'd like to turn it over to our Director of Land Use and Transportation, Mr. Stephen Roberts.
Thank you, Chair Harrington and commissioners. We are here. This is the first public hearing on the first of 2 ordinances that we're bringing forward to implement the state's middle housing rules that were adopted by House Bill 2001 and a subsequent set of state administrative rules. This first ordinance, number 886, really establishes the policy framework within the county's comprehensive framework plan for the urban area and sets the stage then for the provisions in Ordinance 885, which will follow this, which actually establishes development code regulations around middle housing to implement those rules as well. And I want to, before we get started, just really briefly acknowledge our appreciation to the Planning Commission. They had a number of work session meetings and hearings on both of these ordinances, gave very thoughtful consideration to a number of policy questions that we put before them, and we very much appreciate their attention, their time, and their efforts on both of these ordinances, and for helping us to get them to the point where they were ready to bring forward to the Board of Commissioners. I think with that, I will turn to Teresa Cherniak, our Principal Planner for Long Range Community Planning, and Suzanne Savin, a senior planner in that work group as well, and they will walk us through a staff report on Ordinance 886.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'll just turn it over to Suzanne, who'll give the presentation. I'll do part of 885, but Suzanne will do 886.
Thank you, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Suzanne Savin, Senior Planner with Community Planning. Presentation on Ordinance 886, the Comprehensive Framework Plan Amendments for Middle Housing. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of the ordinance and background information on House Bill 2001. Then I'll describe the proposed comprehensive framework plan amendments in the ordinance and summarize the public comment that was received for this ordinance. And then I'll describe the Planning Commission's action. And lastly, I'll discuss the staff's recommendation for engrossment. Next slide, please. So Ordinance 886 amends the Comprehensive Framework Plan for the Urban Area, or the CFP, to implement the state law changes adopted in House Bill 2001, the Middle Housing Bill. And the changes are to specific CFP policies, implementing strategies and summary findings and conclusions to align county policy with the new middle housing requirements. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the state adopted House Bill 2001, which focused on middle housing, the range of housing types between single detached dwellings and larger multi-unit residential buildings. And middle housing includes duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, and cottage clusters. The intent of the bill was to encourage a more diverse mix of housing, provide housing options for people who may not be able to afford a detached home, and provide owners with opportunities to redevelop their property. House Bill 2001 requires the county to adopt regulations to allow middle housing in all residential districts that allow single detached dwellings by June 30th of 2022. Next slide, please. So the Comprehensive Framework Plan for the Urban Area is the source document establishing the land use and transportation policies on issues of countywide concern for the urban unincorporated area. The CFP contains the broad policy directions that are the basis for the county's other comprehensive plan elements, including the Community Development Code. Next slide, please. So because staff is recommending the engrossment of Ordinance 886, I'm going to briefly outline the process for the ordinance when it includes an engrossment. The first step is filing the ordinance after staff has developed proposed plan language, and then scheduling public hearings. And the second step is the notice of the ordinance, and then the public hearings themselves, with the Planning Commission holding public hearings first and making a recommendation to the board, and then the board holding public hearings and considering the staff and Planning Commission recommendations and public testimony. The third step is the ordinance engrossment, which is where the board makes the decision on whether to engross or change the ordinance. And if the ordinance is engrossed, there's more public notice and 2 additional hearings are scheduled. And then lastly, the board decision, where after the public hearings, the board can adopt, reject, or continue the ordinance to a future date. Next slide, please. So Ordinance 886 proposes to amend 6 CFP policies, and these amendments would implement the state law changes adopted in the House bill and better align county policies with the new middle housing requirements. There would be references added to middle housing, and the changes will improve the information accuracy and better reflect the current conditions. Ordinance 886 is one of 2 ordinances that have been filed to address House Bill 2001. Ordinance 885, the other ordinance, proposes amendments to the Community Development Code, and that ordinance will be addressed in the next presentation. Next slide, please. So Ordinance 886 amends the 5 plan policies that are listed on this slide to make sure they reflect the change to more broadly allow and encourage middle housing, and to make some of the language in these policies more clear and accurate, and update them to an extent to better reflect current conditions. There was a particular focus on policies regarding housing affordability and housing choice and availability. Next slide, please. Policy 24, housing discrimination, confirms that the county encourages and supports equal access to quality housing throughout the county for all people. And when staff was looking at the findings and conclusions for this policy, we noted it included extensive but very dated information about housing discrimination in the county. And in several cases, the information is inaccurate and/or somewhat offensive. The ordinance proposes to delete this policy's existing summary findings and conclusions. Updating this policy is an important task that warrants more staff attention than is currently possible. So staff proposes to update the policy's implementing strategies and summary of findings and conclusions as part of a future long-range planning work program task. Next slide, please. So public comment was received prior to the Planning Commission's staff report publication from Planning Commissioner Matt Wellner, 2 community members, and Ryan McKinster of the Home Builders Association. And Commissioner Wellner and community member Mary Manso identified some clarifications to the proposed CFP amendments that staff agreed should be made. And Ryan McKinster of the Home Builders Association submitted a letter that jointly addressed ordinances 885 and 886. His letter expressed general support for both ordinances. His letter had specific comments on Ordinance 885, but no specific comments on Ordinance 886. Community member Seth Alford submitted a letter that jointly addressed Ordinances 885 and 886, and his letter expressed a general opposition to both ordinances. His letter had specific comments about the content of House Bill 2001, but no specific comments on Ordinance 886. Next slide, please. Following the public testimony at the Planning Commission hearing, the Planning Commission deliberated on the ordinance, and during their deliberations, there was a discussion about whether the CFP should include references to past planning efforts, such as Policy 21's reference to activities completed as part of the North Bethany sub-area planning. And there was a general agreement among the planning commissioners that inclusion of such information was unnecessary and no longer relevant. The Planning Commission voted to recommend approval of the ordinance with several changes that clarify language and delete work that has been completed. Next slide, please. So staff recommends that the board conduct the public hearing and order engrossment of Ordinance 886 with the changes recommended by the Planning Commission and shown in Attachment A to the board's staff report, and then to continue the hearing for the engrossed ordinance to May 24th and June 7th and direct staff to mail notice consistent with the charter. And next slide, please. This concludes staff's presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Before we move on to the public hearing, do any commissioners have questions of staff on the information that was in our packet or on the presentation that we had the benefit of today? Hearing none, I'd like to move on to open the public hearing. Clerk Moss?
Yes, Madam Chair. The first person we have is Seth Alford. Seth, please go ahead for up to 2 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Seth Alford. You heard reference to the letter that I sent you. I'm going to read pieces of that hopefully I can get that into my 2-minute allotment here. I was a planning commissioner for the city of Beaverton in 88 and 89. And during my tenure, the Beaverton Planning Commissioner approved many single-family subdivisions. There was never a question that a future legislature would upend those single-family developments with an HB 2001 and make it okay to put apartments in the middle of subdivisions. And make no mistakes, a quadplex or missing middle home is a rebranding of an apartment building with another name. my letter goes on to talk about some of the many things that are wrong with HB 2001 and I reference a op-ed that Evan Fodor wrote in the Eugene Alternate Weekly when this bill was passed. I want to emphasize how this bill won't bring affordable housing. You might think that more housing will be built from raising existing single-family homes, and that means more supply. More supply means lowering of the price. But the problem with this is that the developer has to cover costs. You won't get affordability when the cost includes the overhead of having to tear down and cover the cost of hauling away an existing single-family home. So how did HB 2001 get passed? I think it got passed because Tina Kotek was Speaker of the House and got paid for by the Home Builders Association to create more raw material so they could build homes. And since we won't expand the urban growth boundary, this was the result. I urge you to vote no on this thing. Let the state sue us, or even better, sue the state to tell them to reconsider this motion. I see my time is expired.
Thank you, Seth. Would any other members of the public wish to provide public testimony on this item? Not seeing any additional hands, Madam Chair.
And with that, I'll close this portion of the public hearing and ask for a motion to order the engrossment of the ordinance to include the changes described in the staff report and to continue the hearing to May 20th as well as June 7th, and direct staff to prepare and mail notice of the amendments consistent with requirements of Title 10 of the Washington County Charter. Do we have such a motion? We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers. Do we have a second? We have a second from Commissioner Willie. Clerk Moss, could we take the roll call, please?
Yes, we can, Madam Chair. Commissioner Rogers?
Yes, are we going to have some discussion just for a minute?
Certainly, go right ahead.
Sure. Seth, I heard your comments. I wasn't a fan of middle housing either. There's a lot of issues and a lot of problems, but we're not here to re-engineer that particular bill. It's not within our purview. So to try to take and not advance it in its best form is not an exercise in good government. So I'm supporting it, not because I like it, but because I think our staff has done an excellent job of trying to fit it to Washington County. So that's my comment.
Thank you.
I would second
Commissioner
that.
Rogers.
And just make one comment. Chair, I think you said May 20th. The notes say May 24th. Is that correct? Just to make sure we've got the right dates in there.
May 24th and June 7th of 2022. Right. Thank you.
Right. I second that motion.
Clerk Moss.
Yes, Madam Chair. Commissioner Rogers. Commissioner Treese.
Yes.
Commissioner Fye.
Yes.
Vice Chair Willie.
Yes.
Chair Harrington.
Yes. The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Next, we'll move on to ordinance number 885, the second pairing on this middle housing topic. So first, we need a motion to read ordinance 885 by title only. What are the wishes of the commission? We have a motion from Commissioner Treese. Do we have a second? We have a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank you, commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Mr. Carr, could you please do us the honors?
Yes, Chair Harrington. Ordinance number 885, an ordinance amending the Community Development Code to implement House Bill 2001 middle housing provisions.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Stephen Roberts, the Director of Land Use and Transportation.
Thank you again, Madam Chair and Commissioners. We are now going to turn to Ordinance 885, as you said. This is Development Code amendments to implement House Bill 2001, corollary to the prior ordinance. We do have a few policy topics that we briefed you on at your work session last week that we'll be seeking some board direction on today. And Teresa Cherniak and Ann Kelly from her team will walk us through a presentation. The policy questions really are around whether the board wants to allow detached plexes, whether to require right-of-way dedication with middle housing developments and sidewalk construction. So those are really the primary issues that we're going to be looking for some input and feedback from you on today. With that, I'll ask staff to go ahead and walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Stephen, and good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Principal Community Planner in Long Range Planning with Land Use and Transportation. Next slide, please. So Stephen mentioned this is for Ordinance 885, the Community Development Code changes. We presented information on these ordinances last week in work session, so I'll go through some of this pretty quickly. But since this is the first official presentation and public hearing, we want to make sure the record is complete and both the board and the public has the full picture. We'll provide information about the proposed standards in the filed ordinance, talk about the Planning Commission and staff recommendation for changes or engrossment to the ordinance or to the filed ordinance. We'll talk about public input and the primary policy questions that are still outstanding. And what we hope to achieve by the end of the meeting is board direction on the policy questions so that we can refine the draft regulations and bring back changes to consider through engrossment. Next slide, please. Briefly, the state defines middle housing to include duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses, typically structures that contain more than one housing unit, but smaller than apartment buildings. This range of housing types was pretty common in older neighborhoods, but not as much in newer communities. This has resulted in neighborhoods with little variety or choice. Next slide, please. A diversity of housing mix in neighborhoods can help expand options at a range of prices that will help low and middle income wage earners compete and build more economic diversity. It can increase access to neighborhoods near important amenities and reduce commute distances and costs. It can also help bring rental income that can be used toward mortgage payments, helping owners stay in their homes and existing property owners remain as they age. It can also better serve a wider range of people and household types, including people whose housing options have been historically impacted by discrimination. Next slide, please. Briefly, the Middle Housing Bill requires a county to allow middle housing in all residential districts, urban residential districts, where we allow single detached homes. It provides siting and design standards that may be applied, but specifically disallows current density standards. As are other regulations related to housing, standards must be clear and objective, and they can't discourage middle housing through unreasonable cost or delay. The state has said what is reasonable includes the requirements that are in the adopted rules and the model code, the same requirements as a single detached dwelling in the same district, or less restrictive standards. And as you've heard several times, we must adopt our standards by June 30th, or the model code will automatically apply. Next slide, please. So this shows the different county districts, the urban residential county districts, where middle housing will be allowed. For the most part, this isn't a big change for the county. We don't have exclusive single family districts as some cities do. All of our urban residential districts have allowed a range of housing types. For the county, the main change under the bill is to allow more units, and in some cases, like cottage clusters, to allow them in more places. Current density caps won't apply. some lots will now be able to have more than one unit on them, and townhouses and cottage clusters will be allowed at much higher densities. Next slide, please. You just saw this slide in the last presentation. This is the first hearing on this ordinance, and we do expect a second hearing and further discussion to make changes. But there was a little confusion at the work session about how this works with the Planning Commission recommendation and different policy options and that sort of thing. So, so we're showing this again. We do develop a set of regulations that we then file with the state and with Metro, and then we schedule hearings on that filed ordinance. The hearings at the Planning Commission are about that filed ordinance, and what they do is consider whether or not there should be any changes to that ordinance as filed, and those changes are offered as engrossment. Staff also makes a recommendation to the board, and often it's the same as what the Planning Commission has recommended, but sometimes there are some differences. And in this case, today and at the work session, you'll hear there are some differences between what the Planning Commission has recommended and staff's recommendation. So the board then hears all of that, what the reasoning behind the original filed ordinance, the reasoning behind the Planning Commission's recommendations. You'll hear public testimony, and then based on all of that, provide direction to staff on which changes to make and whether or not to make them. So the hope is that the board will be able to provide the direction to staff at the end of this meeting, so that we can come back May 17th with the actual language with those changes. And at that point, the board would be ordering engrossment, and then we would come back for 2 more hearings. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Ann Kelly to talk about the specifics of the ordinance.
Thank you, Teresa. Hello, commissioners. I will move on to discuss more particular aspects of the ordinance. As an overview, the current ordinance as filed amends the Community Development Code to allow middle housing in all of our 12 urban residential districts, to address related definitions, review procedures, design, siting, and parking standards, and to make some related standards more clear and objective as the state requires for all housing. The ordinance also limits middle housing in natural areas and floodplains to duplexes only, and it requires proof of sufficient infrastructure for most middle housing types, and that is defined by the state to include sewer, water, drainage, and access to a public street that meets adopted emergency standards, which would be Oregon Fire Code rather than county road standards. In order to require certain things for middle housing, per state law, we also have to require them for a single detached home, and I'm talking about a single detached home that's not part of a land division. For example, where somebody just owns an existing lot, a lot of record, and they want to build a house on it. So of note, the filed ordinance requires sidewalk and right-of-way for a single detached home, both in order to require these things for middle housing and to otherwise help address minimal infrastructure deficiencies by requiring these things for all housing. Next slide, please. As far as public information and our outreach efforts, staff presented at 10 Planning Commission work sessions on focus topics, including state rulemaking for middle housing, the market outlook for it, housing types and design, parking, potential for land divisions, and public improvement issues, as well as other topics.
We also reached out to familiarize people with middle housing concepts and discuss why it's needed and who benefits. We did this through social media, an online open house, listening sessions, and focus groups, with an effort to reach people who are often underrepresented. Feedback generally included an interest in middle housing, especially cottage clusters, and that was from builders, nonprofits, and individuals. Some question as to whether rules and standards would bring about needed changes in the housing market, and hopes for less costly housing, more types, even if it's smaller, more affordability, especially for seniors and special needs groups, and pedestrian improvements. Next slide, please. The PC held 4 hearings on this ordinance with significant deliberations. Their primary interest is in facilitating more housing construction to help address the ongoing housing crisis that Oregonians are facing. Their discussions focused on an interest in allowing detached duplex, triplex, and quadplex units. This would require engrossment of the filed ordinance to make changes. We don't currently define plexes as detached units in the filed ordinance. Discussions also focused on sidewalk and right-of-way requirements in the filed ordinance, and treatment of existing accessory dwelling units on a middle housing site. Accessory dwelling units are not included as middle housing in the state definition. And the PC focused on certain siting and design standards, especially relating to garages and minimum window requirements along street frontages. Many of the PC members also supported the concept of a possible future fee program that would contribute toward county sidewalk construction projects. Ultimately, they did recommend approval of both ordinances with changes. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next, we'll summarize the Planning Commission's discussion of detached plexes. State rules permit, but don't require local jurisdictions to allow detached plex units. Our study and a planning commissioner in the industry both suggested that if we allow detached plexes, they would likely dominate the middle housing market. They're similar to detached housing that many builders in this area focus on, would feel quite comfortable moving on to do detached plexes, which are quite similar. Possibly these could be the only thing they want to build or would build. The study and this PC member also suggested that allowing detached plexes could encourage middle housing in numbers, but our study also found the allowance could diminish potential for housing diverse in form and cost. So we might not get as much of a mix of these middle housing types. Urban land is not going to be available forever, and once it's built, it's built. So, you know, the mix could be compromised. So it came down to a priority question for the Planning Commission. Is their focus middle housing in numbers, or are they looking for variety? Some members suggested that home buyers prefer detached homes. However, not everyone can afford the typically higher cost. Staff suggested an option to wait and see if building permits in other local jurisdictions that plan to allow detached plexes might suggest market dominance. And if so, that we could wait and potentially allow these later through a future ordinance, also potentially with incentives for other middle housing types. Unanimously, though, the PC ultimately decided that their focus is to facilitate more home construction during the ongoing housing crisis, and they do not want to wait to allow detached plex units. As for sidewalks, some Planning Commission members supported the new sidewalk requirements as they exist in the filed ordinance.
We could go to
No,
the next slide.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Next slide. Thank you, Teresa. They noted their importance for equity, safety, and community building. Others did not support the requirements, though they did recognize the value of sidewalks. They noted past policy decisions that exempted a single detached home from these requirements and related questions as to proportionality between one detached home and its road system impacts. They noted a potential conflict with a state restriction against standards that would, in quotes, discourage middle housing through unreasonable cost or delay. State provisions don't allow us to do that. And the PC had particular concern about these requirements being particularly onerous for small developments. For example, where an owner might want to expand housing options on their own lot. The PC also pointed out differences in neighborhood desire for sidewalks, and they suggested that as a community need, the community should pay for sidewalks or at least share in their cost. Thus, I guess, the popularity of this potential future sidewalk fee. Ultimately, though the PC did not support sidewalk requirements, though they did support the right-of-way requirements. And they do have a strong interest in a potential future sidewalk fee. Next slide, please. This map just illustrates the existing sidewalk system and the lack of sidewalks. The golden color, those lines show where we do have sidewalks. These were largely obtained through land divisions, subdivisions, and partitions where we require sidewalks as a condition of the land division. Where no sidewalks exist, you see the dark gray or black line. Next slide, please. Moving on to the PC discussion of garage standards. The Planning Commission opposed the filed garage standards. These were borrowed from Model Code directly, as filed for triplexes and quadplexes. They require that garages either be separated from the street by homes or that they're combined with, meaning the garages for all the units on the street frontage, not exceed 50% of that total frontage. And they apply maximum door widths for townhouses and cottage clusters. PC members stress the importance of garage size for multiple cars, storage, quality of life, and marketability of homes. Staff noted some urban design considerations. For a number of decades. We and state and local jurisdictions here and nationwide have been focusing on pedestrian-friendly development, eyes on the street for safety, reducing garage widths to allow for more living space on the ground floor where people can see out. This adds for neighborhood safety. The PC ultimately, though, did support deleting garage standards altogether. Staff, though, suggests just simplifying the garage standards. We think it would be a good idea to allow a choice of any of these garage standards to apply these to any type of middle housing to meet compliance requirements. We propose simplifying them a bit and also making width standards just applicable to the garage door in all cases. Next slide, please. Testimony received in the Planning Commission hearings came from the Home Builders Association of Metropolitan Portland and from individual builders. From these, we heard support for detached flex allowance, noting the buyers prefer these according to those testifying. They
were opposed to sidewalk and right-of-way requirements, and they requested reductions to some minimum street-facing window percentages, which staff and the PC both agree with, and we do propose engrossment to reduce those window requirements. We also heard from the Urban Green Spaces Institute, and they are looking for smaller lot allowances and flexible standards that would contribute to tree and open space protection on site. We heard support for sidewalk and right-of-way requirements from a couple of individuals, and we heard opposition to both House Bill 2001 and the ordinance in general from one individual, and otherwise just general interest in middle housing. Next slide, please. So the Planning Commission voted unanimously 7-0 to recommend approval with changes to the ordinance. The changes involve a recommendation to allow detached duplex, triplex, and quadplex units. They voted to recommend deleting proposed sidewalk requirements altogether, and that would mean for middle housing, single detached homes, as well as expansion of a single detached home by 2,000 square feet or more. That's also currently proposed. They voted to eliminate middle housing garage dimensional restrictions, and to make certain changes that are also supported by staff, and these include clarifying and reducing those window minimums I discussed. We'd be looking to reduce those from 15% across the board to just 12.5% for a one-story along the front of a home. And for all housing types on the street-facing side yard, it would just be 5%. They also asked to reduce a 10-foot street side yard in some districts to 8 feet. That would make it consistent in all districts. We agree with that. They asked to reduce the minimum lot sizes for townhouses in 3 of our districts, where townhouse lot minimums are already smaller than what's proposed for middle housing. We think that's a great idea. They want to reduce the 20-foot minimum townhouse lot frontage to 15 feet and to exclude existing accessory dwelling units and existing single detached dwelling units from a currently filed cap on the number of units for a plex site. We proposed that change and they like that one. And just other minor clarifications and simplifications. Next slide, please. So in response to some questions in our last meeting, we tried to provide some slides that might contribute to the board's discussion of these primary questions, policy questions. As for sidewalk requirements, currently the CDC does not require sidewalks for any of these housing types where we're currently proposing to require them. They're not required for a single detached home when it's not part of a land division, or for expansion of a single detached home. Middle housing isn't currently addressed in the code really, so they're not required for that. And the code does not address a potential fee for county sidewalk construction either. The filed ordinance, of course, does propose these requirements for all of these noted housing types. It does not address a county fee or does not provide a county fee program, but it makes room for requiring that fee if the county adopts a program in the future. Ultimately, the PC recommends deleting all those sidewalk requirements, and they informally support this potential fee program quite strongly. They weren't able to they weren't able to come up with phrasing to support a recommendation for the potential fee program, but they did want us to voice their strong support for it.
So staff has several options that the board could consider. And those would be here in the right column on this slide. For a single detached dwelling, retain the requirement as it's filed in the ordinance or delete it through engrossment. Same for expansion of a single detached dwelling, either retain the requirement or delete it. For middle housing, either retain the requirement in the ordinance, in which case you would also have to retain it for the single detached dwelling, and that's a requirement of state law. Or you could delete it through engrossment altogether for middle housing, as the PC suggests. Next slide, please. Detached plexes, the current CDC does not address these. The filed ordinance does not allow for these. The PC recommends their allowance, and staff is really impartial. We do have some considerations for the board. Either allow detached plexes as the PC recommends through engrossment, or wait and see how this plays out in other jurisdictions that are currently planning to allow them or allowing them. If the building permits in those jurisdictions suggest that detached plexes are dominating the middle housing market, we consider potentially allowing them through a future ordinance and also potentially incentivizing other middle housing types. Next slide, please. As to garage limits, our current code does address these in certain cases. In our medium density districts and higher density and in transit areas, as well as in North Bethany, we do have special provisions that limit the widths of garage doors. And as they get wider, the garage has to be recessed farther. Middle housing isn't addressed by current code. The filed ordinance does not propose any changes to our current standards for other housing types, but it does for middle housing propose certain conditions borrowed from the model code, and we've discussed those, but they basically require that garages be separated from the street by housing, or that door widths be limited, or that total garage width be limited in percentage as it relates to the total frontage of a lot. The PC wants to delete from the filed ordinance all of the garage limitations. And staff recommends that instead of deleting, we simplify those standards and we make all of the options that are currently filed interchangeable for any middle housing type. Any middle housing type can meet garage compliance requirements using any of those provisions. We would also simplify them so that the width controls only apply to the garage door in all cases. And that would be for all attached middle housing types. For cottage standards, though, cottages are detached units and we would want to keep those distinct. But those do allow for actually for 20-foot garage door widths, understanding that cottage garages are all often shared structures. So the board could consider either deleting all of the garage standards through engrossment as the PC recommends, or the simplification approach that's recommended by staff. Either one would require engrossment. Next slide, please. Overall, staff recommends that the board conduct the public hearing for ordinance number 885, provide us with preliminary direction to engross the ordinance to make the changes supported by both the PC and staff, and to provide direction on policy questions regarding the sidewalks, detached plexes, and garages that we've discussed.
and then continue this hearing to May 17th for additional discussion and engrossment. Thank you. Next slide, please. This slide lists the upcoming board hearings. Today's, of course, and then on May 17th, we'd have our second hearing, and we anticipate an order of engrossment that day. June 7th would then be our first engrossment hearing, and June 28th, the second engrossment hearing with anticipated adoption of the ordinance and findings. June 30th is the deadline for adoption of the ordinance that's applied by the state. Next slide, please. Thank you all very much. And if you have any questions, or if you'd like us to go back to prior slides for particular discussions, please let us know.
Could we go back 2 slides, please? Thank you, staff. You covered an awful lot of ground here today, as well as all of the research and work that you've done on these topics that you brought forward to us in many prior work sessions, as well as working with the Planning Commission. And there was a lot of work that you did with the Planning Commission. Commissioners, before we go to open a public hearing, I wanted to first pause and see if you have any questions right now. And I'll ask the same question after the public hearing as part of our discussion and direction. But I don't want anyone to get hung up without having the opportunity to ask your questions now. Any commissioner questions at this juncture? Okay, seeing none then, I'd like to open a public hearing. Clerk Moss.
Yes, first, Madam Chair, we have Ryan Mankiser representing the Home Builders Association, so they'll get up to 5 minutes. So, Ryan, can you unmute and can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me, everyone?
We can hear you just barely, but go ahead and speak into your mic.
Thank you. I'll speak a little loudly. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Ryan McKinster, Director of Policy and Government Affairs with the Home Builders Association of Metropolitan Portland. Just want to give you a little bit about ourselves first and then go through my testimony. We represent over 1,300 companies and tens of thousands of women and men who work in the residential building and remodeling industries throughout the greater Portland region. We work to promote housing affordability and are dedicated to maximizing housing choice for all who reside in the region. One of the most significant policy decisions in recent history to address affordability and that housing choice is before you today in ordinances 885 and 886, but I will only be speaking directly to 885. First, I want to begin by thanking staff and Planning Commission for all the hard work they did on this. Although we feel the original proposal needed a few tweaks to realize the intent and goal of HB 2001, staff worked hard to offer an update to code that minimized additional burdens on housing production. And through the hearings process, the Planning Commission addressed those concerns and are contained in their recommendations before you. We support the Planning Commission recommendations and encourage you to pass Ordinance 85 with those changes included. We have a housing crisis in the region, both of price and supply, and HB 2001 was designed to start addressing both. More specifically, we support and encourage communities to allow detached plexes as part of the development code. As with all things in residential construction, the more options to develop a lot, the more likely it will convert, and this holds true with middle housing as well. Allowing detached plexes gives builders the ability to maximize development choices on individual lots, which in turn makes them more economically viable and possibly more likely to develop more middle housing units. For example, in Portland, some of our builders are currently trying to accomplish some of this work that you're discussing today, specifically avoid lots with any large trees or any other constraints because the cost they add to the project makes them too risky or uneconomic. However, if they were allowed to develop 2 detached units on those lots while leaving the tree in place, the lot which they had previously passed up may now be a viable option for the market, addressing 2 issues. Two units on a lot which would normally allow for 1 offers possibly a lower price point product. In addition, that's 2 more units on the ground, and we know the underlying crisis is driven by a supply issue. We also agree with the Planning Commission recommendation to remove the requirement for sidewalks. A sidewalk requirement is counterproductive to the intent of 2001 by adding costs to residential development where it doesn't already exist. I must, however, point out that a large part of development, future development, is occurring in subdivisions in Washington County. That due to the land divisions required will already require sidewalks, those will be produced. So if this is included in the passage of 885, the project's burden with the additional costs will be the more affordable units we are trying to create. Just as Portland serves as a model for detached plexes, it does for the sidewalk issue as well. There are parts of Portland, especially in the southeast, that have undeveloped areas with looking for sidewalks. Our builders choose not to even look at lots in those areas to avoid the sidewalk development requirements for the reasons I've already stated that are similar to that detached plexes, uncertainty and cost. To understand what this requirement would mean for middle housing, I reached out to some members to estimate the cost. For a duplex on a 50-foot lot, the total cost, including materials, labor, survey, design, etc., would add over about $6,000 to the project, which accounts for an additional $3,000 on each unit. To put that into perspective, according to a February 2022 NAHB study, for every $1,000 increase in the price of a home in the greater Portland area, about 783 families are priced out of that home ownership. This increase alone would price almost 2,300 families out of those two units. Multiple times during the hearing process, staff and planning commission members stated the more sidewalks are desired and in need of the community, and we agree. If it is a community need or benefit, the burden should fall to the community rather than new homes we are trying to create as part of the housing crisis solution. The Planning Commission had discussed some other ways to address sidewalks, and we look forward to those conversations, but this is the wrong time, place, and vehicle to consider adding cost to housing. Thank you for your time, and on behalf of our industry, our community who is dealing with this crisis, and the new homeowners who will soon be your constituents, please vote to adopt the Planning Commission recommendations for Ordinance 885. Thank you for your time and for all the efforts of you, the Planning Commission, and staff.
Thank you, Ryan. Next, Madam Chair, Commissioners, we have Seth Alford for the rest will be 2 minutes, not representing any groups. Mr. Alford, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to make just one more point that if Commissioner Rogers thinks that this is was bad legislation, you have the opportunity now to fix this, and so I think you have the obligation then to go ahead and fix this. I think that one of the lessons that I learned as a planning commissioner 30 years ago was that people don't pay attention to land use, and they're paying less attention to land use issues in the pandemic. If you were to poll Washington County residents, you would probably find that a lot of people are unaware of this. I would suggest that you send out a postcard to everybody, all the single family homeowners, or perhaps just everybody. Might be cheaper to do it that way, and let them know that this change is coming, that so that people are aware that this is coming down the pike, and that so they can know to voice their opposition. I'll yield back the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Next, we have Matt Wellner. Matt? Matt, can you hear us?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. My name is Matt Wellner. I think you all know that I'm a planning commissioner. I have been since 2012. I've worked in planning and land development in Washington County for over 20 years. I personally believe that although HB 2001 may not be perfect, I think it was created for a good reason and to address a real problem. There's 3 letters for me in the record, one with some general comments, one that is specific to the detached plexus issue, and then there was a final letter that went in last Friday that addresses the 3 specific issues that staff raised for you at work session. I'm here today as an individual asking that you support the Planning Commission recommendations for engrossment. I think staff's done a great job in their presentation of the conversations that led up to those recommendations. I think it's difficult to get to the real themes about how we got to those recommendations in the first place. And I wanted to speak just for a minute about that. I was a participant in those conversations. I was also an observant of those conversations. And I think that there was a general understanding amongst all the planning commissioners that this housing crisis is in fact real. There is a significant imbalance between supply and demand. There's a sheer lack of housing, and that's our greatest problem, and that it puts pressure on all levels of housing affordability. HB 2001 was presented to us as a tool to help alleviate that imbalance through the creation of more dense living environments. We, as a planning commission, wanted to encourage, not discourage, all middle housing types. We wanted to provide as much flexibility as possible within reason, and we wanted to eliminate unnecessary impediments. That was the feeling that I had from those conversations. That was the message that I heard from the planning commissioners, and and I believe that's why our recommendations were unanimous on all but the sidewalk issue. Let me make sure that, yep, my time is up, so I'm not going to speak to any specific issues, but I'd be happy to entertain questions if there are any. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Matt. Would any other members of the public like to provide public testimony on this public hearing item? I'll give you just a moment to raise your hands. Not seeing any additional hands, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. And at this time, I'd like to close the public hearing of today and ask if staff could please bring the slide presentation back up to the, I think it's the second to the last slide. Thank you. So we've had a great presentation, a comprehensive presentation from our staff, and we have had the public hearing for today. So at this juncture, we've been asked to provide direction with regard to the ordinance, as well as direction on 3 specific topic areas. So I would like to invite commissioners to ask any questions they have of staff, as well as speak to each of these 3 specific issue areas, as well as please do feel free to comment on the entirety of ordinance number 885. Commissioner Rogers, it looks like you've unmuted and you're ready to go. Please kick us off.
Sure, I'm happy to. First, regardless of my concerns, and I voiced those in many, many different venues regarding this type of housing, it's state policy. And so I've always said that we implement state policy and the best of our ability. So that's where I am today. In regard to the questions, I really don't have an issue with the detached plexes or the garage issues that have been mentioned. But frankly, not having sidewalks is a bridge too far for me. So if, just to tip my hand, if there aren't sidewalks required, we've seen what happens in areas like Aloha, who commissions before me, they decided not to require that. And had they required a lot of those sidewalks and trails and bike paths, we wouldn't be in sort of the deficit position we are today with those assets not being there. So if we're going to really walk the walk and have a multimodal approach, a full system, I can't get there without the sidewalk. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. Are any other commissioners ready? Go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Yeah, I have a procedure question, Chair. So are we going to talk, kind of take a vote? I don't know if it's a formal vote, but on basically 4 issues: 1, 2, engross the ordinance, and then the second, what's our position on sidewalks? Third, what's our position on detached? And fourth, what's our position on garages? Are we going to do it that way, or tell me how you were planning to facilitate this? And then I do have one additional question.
So we've heard for each of these 3 topic areas, we have heard different recommendations. So I would recommend first that we go over each of these 3 topic areas because that will provide us with some information about going about engrossing the ordinance, right? And we can certainly flash back to each of those 3 tables that was shown prior to this slide, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have those slides on another computer here. My question to staff was, I was surprised at the prescriptive recommendations, specifically on garages and windows. And I realize windows isn't a part of this, but so is that normal? If I wanted to build a single family house on a lot, would those garage requirements, I would have to comply with that to build my garage, to build my house?
I suppose I'll answer. We have a series of choices for a single detached home on its own lot. An applicant has to choose 5 from a list. Some of them include window percentage minimums. Those apply to any single detached dwelling. In other areas that are near transit amenities or frequent bus service, for example, or just higher density, we do have minimum window frontage requirements. And again, that's not just for design, but for safety reasons. Studies show that when there are eyes on the street, when the exterior of a home engages passersby, there is more safety than when a home presents a blank wall or just a garage in the front.
Yeah, I like obviously natural light, and I like lots of windows, so I don't have a problem with that. I was surprised at how prescriptive that the staff recommendations were on, specifically on the garage. So that's the only questions I have, and I'm ready to vote on the other items.
I'll just add part of that to the state rules and the model code did, on the design side, did provide a lot of pretty specific and prescriptive requirements that could be adopted by jurisdictions. We did look at those, and some of them we thought maybe went too far or were being too prescriptive. Maybe these were the ones we kind of whittled down to a smaller list that we thought were more important ones, and the garage one was one of those.
I think Commissioner Treese may have a question, but I wanted to add that state law requires us to be prescriptive. We have to be clear and objective now for any standards that we apply to housing, or we at least have to have an approval path that includes only clear and objective standards. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Next, we'll move on to Commissioner Treese.
Thank you, Chair. Before we get into the individual pieces, I just wanted to make a couple comments. Number one, I'm trying to stay focused on what the purpose of middle housing and what the benefits are. And I think that, that's where I am in relationship to how I'll be making decisions. Secondly, it's really impactful for me when I look at the fact that the work that the Planning Commission did and the fact that it was a unanimous decision in terms of their recommendations. That's very impactful to me, and I wanted to highlight that piece. I appreciate the work that the staff has done, but that we put the Planning Commission in place to advise us, and that's a powerful statement for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Treese. Commissioner Fye, is there anything you'd like to add at this time?
I had a question for the staff. My understanding is besides the sidewalk, the planning commission were on the same side. Where's the staff? How different is what the planning commission recommended around garages versus detached plexes? How different is it what the staff is recommending? Minus the sidewalk.
I'm not totally sure I fully grasp your question. The staff, maybe if we went back to the slides for these particular topics, it would be helpful. But as far as garage standards, staff does not recommend fully deleting the proposed requirements. We do propose making them more flexible and simplifying them. And the PC, of course, recommends fully deleting any kind of garage controls. And then you also asked about detached plexes. So maybe if we go to that slide, the PC recommends allowing detached plexes. Staff, we're not passionately tied to allowing or not allowing detached plexes. They're not currently included in the filed standards. We do have some informative research. We hired Eco Northwest to do a study for us, and they did suggest that if we do allow detached plexes, they would most likely be a dominant middle housing type. While we're not opposed to allowing detached plexes, we do suggest potentially just waiting and allowing them through a future ordinance once we see how their allowance plays out in other jurisdictions locally. And if they turn out to be very dominant, we could then come up with an ordinance where we allow them, but maybe with some additional incentives for other middle housing types to get that intended mix, the bill's intended housing mix.
Thank you. And I think that's exactly what I was asking. Sorry, I asked confusingly, but I wanted to see these two slides. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll contribute my comments. I really appreciate all of the work that has gone into following through on the requirements of the state legislation through both Ordinance 886 as well as 885. We have for, gosh, a good, really, we've known since during the Great Recession that we needed more housing. We needed more multifamily housing. And it's only gotten worse in all categories since then, particularly where we find ourselves here in 2022. And not only do we have a housing crisis here in Washington County and our 3-county metropolitan region, we have it in every market across the United States. So I applaud the work of the state legislature to direct us to do more, to help us work to solve the imbalance that we have here in our communities, an imbalance that will likely last for a decade, perhaps, even with these changes. I think I didn't go back, but I think in one of our early work sessions with staff on this topic, I seem to recall being presented with a study that forecasted, now emphasis on the word forecast, or estimated that this legislation would apply to approximately 7 to 9% of the land in urban unincorporated Washington County. So we're still talking about a relatively small amount of land that could make positive change, but it's not like we're going to see drastic wholesale changes across the majority of urban unincorporated Washington County. But with my own experience in the housing market, in my 20s, having the opportunity to buy a garden style condo, one of the plexes in these proposals enabled me to get into the housing market and build equity. To have, it's the longest I had ever lived in a place on my own, longer than the apartments that I had rented. So there was a lot of stability in multiple domains. Staff's done an incredible amount of work, and we can see it reflected by some of the simple things, the pictures in today's presentation. So thank you for all of that due diligence, staff. I really appreciate it. And then we have the work that was done by our full planning commission. And I commend our staff for today's presentation in reminding us of the number of work sessions, and the staff report for laying out the extent of the conversations that planning commissioners had, all to give us the opportunity of these recommendations today. As to these different topic areas, if I haven't thanked the planning commission members enough, let me pause there and say it again. Thank you. Really incredible work. In having the time, the opportunity and the time to read the staff report and have more conversations leading up to today's meeting, I have changed my mind on a few of these different topic areas. So as I think presented in order of the slides, on the sidewalks, I would like to follow the recommendation from the Planning Commission to delete the requirements from the ordinance through engrossment. I think we need to do all that we can to incentivize the development of middle housing. And it took me a while, but I now understand that land divisions do still involve sidewalk requirements. So that's even further narrowed the cases where this potential ordinance would apply without providing a sidewalk. Unlike Commissioner Rogers, to me, allowing this does incentivize and provides for addressing this crisis and make positive progress. On detached plexes, here too, I would like to allow detached plexes as the Planning Commission has recommended. So allow them through the engrossment. As to garages, and I had to drill down on both garages and windows and appreciate the differences between the staff recommendation and the Planning Commission. Here too, I lean towards the recommendation from the Planning Commission. Let's incentivize where we can as much as we can and delete the requirements through the engrossment. So I think what we now need to do, we've each had the opportunity to provide feedback on these three different areas, though I don't know that I've heard, I know where Commissioner Rogers stands on these different items, and I know where I stand, but I don't know that I know where Commissioner Treese, Commissioner Fye, and Commissioner Willie stand on these three different categories. Could each of you help me understand? Go ahead, Commissioner Treese.
I'm accepting the Planning Commission recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
I too just want to make sure that that I understand that I am in agreement with the Planning Commission recommendations on garages and on detached, and that we do not require sidewalks. So if that was consistent with what Commissioner Tree said, then I agree.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Delete
All right.
through engrossment. Yep.
Right.
Commissioner Fye?
I'm in support of the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Okay, okay. All right, so.
Excuse me, Chair, I'd just like to add that I am in alignment with you in relationship to the sidewalks, that I, after a lot of discussion, understood what narrow focus there is here, but that I still support the, I want to make every opportunity to create those sidewalks. So, but while I support the Planning Commission's position, I really do agree, and protecting right-of-ways, those types of things are important to me.
Yes. And so that sounds like separately from the ordinance, there can be a recommendation to, in the future, consider a sidewalk fee. I didn't hear that that was part of the ordinance, but rather additional direction. Staff, am I correct on that?
That's correct, Chair. Yep, we would be open to your direction, and then we would add a task to do that into a future work plan draft program to share with the board for prioritization.
Yep.
And
so I join you, Commissioner Treese, on that. How about other commissioners?
Well, I'm supportive of sidewalks and want to encourage that, but I'd have to know more about a sidewalk fee and how that works, what that looks like before I'm ready to make that decision.
Which is exactly what we're recommending. Future consideration of a sidewalk fee. It's not making the actual decision today. And Mr. Roberts, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I did want to just suggest in whatever motion that the board might make or direction that you provide, to be clear that if I understand right, I think the board supports the idea of going ahead with the requirement for right-of-way dedication with middle housing development, but not the sidewalk construction. I just wanted to get some clarity around that.
Could we go back to the slide on sidewalks?
I think that would be slide 12, or did you mean the table?
Let's see.
So this is the slide that I was referring to. If you were directing your question at me versus other members of the commission and staff, then this is the one I was expecting.
Thank you.
So the filed ordinance, oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
The filed ordinance does require dedication of right-of-way, and the Planning Commission did support keeping that in the ordinance. So there's no change recommended by either of us at this point.
Thank you.
With regard to the right-of-way.
With regard to the right-of-way, yeah. Yeah, so kind of separating those two, sidewalks and right-of-way.
Yep. Yep. Okay, so what I heard was 4 commissioners interested in moving forward with deleting the sidewalk requirement as recommended by the Planning Commission. allowing through engrossment, all 5 of us for detached plexes, and all 5 of us to delete through engrossment the garage items. Mr. Roberts, could I at least get you to confirm with your staff here if you agree that I have summarized this
Yes,
correctly?
that's consistent with the notes that I have taken down as well. And
Okay.
I would just ask perhaps if the staff have any clarifying questions that might be helpful at this point before we move forward.
I don't have clarifying questions, but I just want to clarify the process that when we come back in May, we will have all the specific language available for you to officially engross the ordinance to do these things. So that's part of the process. That's why this guidance is important, so we can craft that specific language.
So pardon the confusion. I thought we were being asked to provide direction, not only on those areas, but also direction for engrossment today. So Mr. Carr, could you please help me understand logistically what I'm supposed to be doing today?
So we are looking for direction on engrossment, and we'll bring back the engrossed ordinance. You've got an ordinance in front of you that was the original proposed ordinance. You've got recommendations from the Planning Commission. It sounds like you've given direction about what you want, and we'll bring back an engrossed ordinance.
Mr. Roberts, is there additional discussion you wish to have with your staff at this time?
I did see Anne has her hand raised, if we could.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one, not necessarily a clarification, but to avoid any confusion moving forward. The elimination of garage standards relates to garage design limitations. The state rule does preclude us from changing certain requirements related to cottage cluster garages. So when you see the engrossed ordinance, you will still see a restriction for cottage cluster garages that allows only up to 200 square feet of a garage to be excluded from the maximum footprint for a cottage cluster. And that's just a hard and fast state regulation in the rule. So we can't change that particular one.
So if we could please go to the garage slide. And thank you, Ms. Kelly, for following through on all these details. Because in order to be successful in legislation to follow or to comply with the requirements of the House bill, there are a lot of details. And we're really fortunate to have such tremendous staff to work through all these different topic areas. So when I summarized very simply, following the Planning Commission recommendation, it obviously, as illustrated on this slide, does not enumerate all those details that we are relying upon staff to follow through for us. So thank you very much for that effort. And Mr. Roberts, I'll turn it back to you to see if there's any further discussion from your staff.
All right, and I do see Teresa has her hand raised.
Oh, just one last thing. If we go to the slide 2 before this, I think it's 2 before this. Sorry, one more before this. Right. So with the Planning Commission, those were the three items that were still questions. There were all these other changes then that were supported both by the Planning Commission and the staff. So just confirming that the board would want us to go forward with these changes as well.
So I know for myself, I am in support of the Planning Commission recommendations in addition to what I've provided for those three specific areas. And I believe the commission is right there as well. But now is the time for any commissioner who wishes to state otherwise. Commissioner Willie is still thumbs up. Okay, could we go back to the first staff recommendation slide? So we've conducted the public hearing. We've talked about the range of coverage of the proposed ordinance. We've given direction in both the general ordinance as well as the three different topic areas about what the commission would like to see. Mr. Carr, do we need to make a formal motion to direct the engrossment?
That would be my preference, Chair.
I'm sorry, I was moving my papers. Could you say that again?
Okay, that would be my preference, Chair. A
Okay.
motion to continue the hearing to May 17th for further discussion and engrossment as directed.
What are the wishes of the commission with regard to that motion? So moved from Commissioner Willie, seconded from Commissioner Treese. Is it okay for us to do a voice vote, or do we need a roll call vote since this is an ordinance?
You do not need a roll call vote because you're not passing the ordinance, you're continuing it. You're fine.
Okay, thank you, sir. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Commissioner Rogers, could we hear from you, please? Nope. Okay. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. All right. Very good work, everyone. A lot of exploration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Treese.
I'm just asking a procedural question here. When a commissioner doesn't vote, is that considered, I realize we're not voting on the ordinance, we're voting on the extension, but how is that recorded?
So,
I'm
Commissioner,
looking.
go ahead, Tom.
No, you go ahead, Kevin.
Commissioner Rogers had noticed that he was going to be taking off, so he would have been absent for that vote.
Okay, thank you. I just was curious how we operate there. Thank you.
My answer to your question is we operate fluidly. Thank you. All right, we're in the home stretch, folks. We just have one more public hearing. And this one is with regard to vacating the proposed portion of Southwest Tonquin Road, a public right-of-way situated in the southwest, 1/4 of section 34 T2S R1W WM Washington County Ordinance. And at this juncture, I'd like to turn it over to Director Stephen Roberts.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Appreciate you going through that introduction. That's a lot of words and letters strung together, so thank you. I'd like to turn things over to Stacy Shetler, who's our county engineer. He's going to provide a pretty brief staff report for you about this proposed vacation, and then he and I would be able to answer any questions that you may have afterward.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, Chair Harrington, commissioners. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Again, I'm Stacy Shetler, County Engineer with the Department of Land Use and Transportation. Before you today is the matter of vacating a portion of Southwest Tonquin Road, vacation number 570. At the end of the staff report,
2 actions will be requested. 1, that your board conduct a public hearing, and 2, that your board approve a resolution and order vacating a portion of Southwest Tonquin Road. Next slide. Tonquin Road is classified as an arterial in the Transportation System Plan. The road is located in the southeast corner of the county, and it runs between Grams Ferry Road near Tualatin and Wilsonville to Oregon Street in Sherwood. The proposed area to be vacated is identified in the blue on the map shown on the screen. Next slide. The portion of Tonquin Road is a remnant of right-of-way that resulted from the construction and realignment of 124th Avenue and Basalt Creek Parkway. The right-of-way is no longer needed for county road purposes, and there should be no adverse impacts to public utility providers. Next slide. Notifications regarding the vacation request were made, and there is no known opposition at this time. At today's public hearing, your board, you may receive additional testimony to consider. Next slide. So based on the information presented, staff requests your board conduct the public hearing and then approve the resolution in order. This concludes the staff report, and I can answer questions at this time. Thank you.
Commissioners, do you have any questions of Mr. Shetler? Seeing none, I'd like to open a public hearing. Clerk Moss.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would any members of the public wish to provide public testimony on this road vacation? Please utilize the raise hand function. Give you just a moment. Not seeing any hands, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. And with that, I'd like to close the public hearing. What are the wishes of the commission with regard to approving a resolution and order vacating the proposed portion of Southwest Tonquin Road? We have a motion from Commissioner Willie, a second from Commissioner Treese. All those in favor, please vote by raising your hand or saying aye. Thank Commissioner Treese. Thank you. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. And that brings us to the latter part of our meeting.
Would any members of the public like to provide public comment for up to 5 minutes before the board at this time? I'll give you just a moment to utilize the raise hand function. Not seeing any hands, Madam Chair.
All righty. Oh, good, I'm still unmuted. Okay, with that, I'll start with board announcements. On Thursday evening, as we talked about in our work session meeting, we'll be having our budget committee orientation Thursday evening, April 21st, brought to you by Zoom starting at 6 o'clock. Next Tuesday, we'll have our work session in the afternoon starting at 2 p.m., followed by our evening board meeting for the month. That's Tuesday, April 26th. Then we're into the month of May, and I'll just announce our first week's meetings. On Tuesday, May 3rd, we will have our work session starting at 9 in the morning, and then starting at 10, we'll convene as the Housing Authority Board of Directors, and then subsequent to that at approximately 10:30, we'll have our weekly board meeting. Then on Friday, May 20th, we will be convening as the Clean Water Services Board of Directors Budget Committee, and that meeting starts at 9. It is once again a Zoom meeting. Oh, and I think I need to keep going a little bit more. That really shows that we are in full swing budget time between the beginning of May and into the middle of June. So on Monday, May 9th, we begin the process of all the different budget committee meetings for the different parts of the Washington County budget. So on Monday, May 9th, starting at 5:30, once again by Zoom, we will convene as the Washington County and the Service District for Lighting #1 Budget Committee. Then the following Tuesday, or the following day, Tuesday, May 10th, we'll have a full board work session day. Continuing on with a busy week, Thursday, May 12th, we'll convene another budget committee meeting. Once again, according to this information, the Washington County and Service District for lighting, once again at 5:30. Then the following Monday, we will have our combined Enhanced Sheriff Patrol District and Urban Road Maintenance District Budget Committee meeting starting at 5:30. And those are two that provide service to mainly our urban unincorporated areas here in Washington County. Then the following day, Tuesday, May 17th, we'll have a work session that starts at 9 a.m. and like today, a board meeting that starts at 10 a.m. So those are the different meetings that I needed to make sure to announce verbally in today's meeting. Commissioners, are there any other announcements through board announcements today? Seeing none, I'm interested in hearing a motion to adjourn today's Washington County Board of Commissioner meetings. Thank you, Commissioner Treese. Do we have a second? We have a second from Commissioner Willie. All those in favor of adjourning today's meeting, please vote by raising your hand. Thank you, Commissioners. Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 4-0. Thank you very much. And Commissioners, would you like to stick to reconvening at 1 o'clock, or would you like to convene at 1:06? Sorry, I can't figure out hand signals anymore.
1 o'clock, please.
1 o'clock's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll see you at 1 o'clock for our work session reconvene. Bye-bye.